cakes or whatever your little heart desires with coloring. So you want to get your bundt cake like this. It could take about 30 minutes for it to get cool enough for us to flip it out. So now we have our red and our green. Nice and smooth. Hey guys, welcome to Good Food Made Better. My name's Amanda Ray, and I'm here to help you learn how to make any sort of recipes that you've always seen on like magazines or TV and you're just not really sure how to start or where to start. Today I figured I would celebrate the festive season by making a nutmeg bundt cake with a colorful red and green glaze on top. I'm ready. Are you ready? Let's get going. Okay, first what you want to do is you're going to need 3/4 cup of butter softened. You don't want it melted. Whenever you're making a cake or cookies, you always want to have your butter soft enough where you can squeeze it and it's not hard in the middle. If you don't have enough time to let it sit out in room temperature to get softened on its own, put it in a microwave, but only go by 4-second increments. If you go too long, let's say 10 seconds, the whole stick would be melted. So you're going to need 3/4 cup. If you're not really sure how much butter that is, it's 1 whole stick and 1/2 stick. So let's go ahead and get those in there. Then I also have 1 1/4 cup of sugar. This is regular granulated sugar. You can buy it anywhere in the store, nothing fancy about it. You're going to go ahead and put that right in there with your butter. What we need to do as the base of most cookies and cakes and recipes is you have to cream together the butter and the sugar. If you don't have a stand mixer, you can use a hand mixer. Those work just as well. Or you can just use a spatula or a spoon. That works too. It's a little bit more work, but I do recommend using a KitchenAid mixer because it helps you get the job done a little bit faster. So you're going to go ahead and get that creamed. While that's creaming, right here, I have 1 1/2 cups of flour. To that, I'm going to add some salt and some baking powder and just a little bit of nutmeg. Not too much nutmeg. It is a very powerful spice and you don't want it to overwhelm the chocolate and the bundt. Let's go ahead and mix those in. You always want to sift your flour. I don't use a hand sifter. You know, there are a lot of people that use hand sifters. I like to just use a fork because it'll get the job done just about the same. I put in 3/4 teaspoon of baking soda and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. We got those mixed. Set it back aside. We'll use it later. Alright, now our butter and sugar are perfectly creamed. You're looking for a pale color. You don't want any chunks of butter in there. You want it to be nice and pale and smooth. You don't want to mix it too long because if you mix it too long at a high speed, the butter will start to melt. Alright, so now let's go ahead and add our eggs. We have 3 eggs. I've already cracked them. I put them in the bowl. We don't have to do them one at a time on this recipe, so we're just going to go ahead and put them all in there. Alright. Now we're going to wait a few minutes. We want to get it all mixed up. We don't want to have chunks of eggs still in there. We want the butter and sugar to combine together with the eggs. Let's get our handy dandy spatula. One of the most important things when you're making cakes or cookies is you always want to clean off your spoon and the sides of your bowl. If you don't, it won't incorporate properly. And then when you go to pour the batter out, you'll have a big chunk of butter and sugar on the bottom of your bowl. Alright, so let's keep mixing that. Looking pretty good. Now it's not going to be combined completely. You know, it's not going to become smooth by any means because the butter is not melted, it's softened. Alright, that looks good. Now we're going to add our vanilla. Right here we have about 1/2 teaspoon of vanilla extract. We're going to get that on and going. Alright, looks good. Let's pull this back up. Scrape the sides of the bowl. Get them nice and good. Alright. Now, right here, Right here we have 3/4 of a cup of semi-sweet chocolate chips. You can also use regular semi-sweet baking bars. If you want to use a baking bar instead of a semi-sweet chocolate chip, I recommend using about 8 ounces. Each bar of your baking chocolate is equivalent to about 1 ounce. So you're going to need 8 little squares from your semi-sweet baking bar. Now when we melt it, we could melt it in the microwave, but I don't necessarily like to always melt them in the microwave. So what we're going to do is we're going to put it in a bowl, double boiler, a little pot, and you add just enough water where it's not touching the bottom of the bowl, but it's really close to the bottom of the bowl. And then simply take your chips and you pour them into the bowl, and then you place it inside the pot, which I'll show you in a minute. A double broiler. You get a small pot and you fill it with just a little bit of water. You don't need a whole lot. You're not trying to boil it. You're just more or less using the heat and the steam from the water to help you slowly but gradually melt the chocolate. You want to keep stirring it while you have the chocolate in your bowl, or it'll burn and it'll be scorched, and it just doesn't taste good. It'll ruin the whole bundt cake. I told you I'd show you. I have a small pot. Sorry guys, it's not the best looking, but it works. I only have just a little bit of water in there. Not a whole lot, but enough. Enough water to, like I said, get the heat from the steam onto the bottom of the bowl. Here in the bowl, we have our chocolate chips, 3/4 of a cup if you forgot the measurements. When this starts to simmer, we don't want the water to be boiling per se, we want it to more or less simmer very gently. You're going to want to put the bowl inside on top like this. So make sure you don't use a bowl that is too small because you don't want it laying in the boiling water. Suspend it above the water. I'll get back to you when I got the water ready. Now our water's not boiling, it is simmering. So we are ready to take our chocolate chips. Keep stirring because otherwise it will scorch and it will burn. Not fun. It'll ruin the bundt cake. Stir in. It'll get a little hard to stir, you know how chocolate chips are. Baking chocolate is a little bit easier to melt, but chocolate chips are not that bad. You do need to be careful when you're messing with a double boiler because you can get burned. Right, our chocolate's melting nicely. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to add just a splash of vegetable oil. What that does is help the chocolate be a little bit more smooth so it's not so chunky, and that way it will incorporate a lot better into our batter mix. There we go. Nice and smooth. Doesn't take very long, but like I said, you know, you want to make sure you keep stirring it because otherwise it will scorch, it will burn. I use this method a lot. Most of the time it's with the baking chocolate cubes, and I use it for, you know, anything like pretzels or making cute little chocolate designs to go on cake or cookies or whatever. Okay, so that's done. We're gonna go ahead and move it off. See how nice and shiny that is? It's very shiny. And it's very smooth. We don't have any chunks of the chocolate chips in there anymore. Alright, so we're going to want to let that cool for a few minutes before we add it into our batter because we don't want it to cook the eggs. Let's go ahead and get this off. So we're going to leave that right there for just a couple minutes. And I'll get you guys a little bit better of a close-up of that. So here's the chocolate. Nice and smooth. We don't want it to let it sit too long because then otherwise it will start to harden again, and then we'll be back to step 1 on having to warm it up again via the double boiler. We have let our chocolate cool for a few minutes, that way it's not super hot anymore. What we want to do is we want to add this into our batter. Well, not per se a batter yet, but we want to add this in with our sugar and our egg, vanilla. Try to get as much of it out of the bowl as you can. Alright, now we need to add our sour cream. Alright, now what we want to do is we want to add our flour and our 1 cup of milk. This is our flour mixture. We've added our baking soda and our salt and our nutmeg to this. So we want to add it alternately, which means we want to do some flour and then some milk, and then some flour and then some milk, and so on until we have used all of our flour and our milk. And a little bit of milk.
Just a little bit.
Son Anthony. Alright, some flour. Some milk. Alright, then the rest of our flour. And then the rest of our milk. We're going to wait for that to incorporate. Now we're going to scrape down the sides of the bowl. Alright. Last but not least is our sour cream. We add sour cream to our cake mix because it adds extra moisture. So right here we only have about 1/4 cup of sour cream. And that's plenty enough just to keep it moist. That's all we want. Okay? Let's turn it up a little bit. Right here I have what is called a bundt pan. This is a bundt pan. This is a bundt pan. I know you've seen them in stores all over the place, and some of them have really cute, intricate designs like this one. I actually just got this one from my mom for Christmas, so I'm pretty excited to try it out and see how well it works. Now, even though this is a non-stick pan, I still want to spray it with non-stick spray just to be sure it's not going to stick. Some people use butter and flour to line their cake pans, and that works just as well too. But I've found that non-stick spray works pretty good. I've never had any problems with it. So our batter's done. We're going to take our beater out. Alright. Now we pour our batter into the bundt pan, and it's going to cook for about 45 to 50 minutes, depending upon, your oven and its settings. When it's done baking, you want to let it cool inside the pan before you try to flip it out. Otherwise, it'll probably fall apart. So I have my oven preheated to 350 degrees. Let's go ahead and get her in. Alright guys, our cake is finally out of the oven. We're going to let it cool completely in the pan. It could take about 30 minutes for it to get cool enough for us to flip it out. The bundt cake, it came out just fine. It didn't fall apart because I let it cool long enough. That's a very important step. You have to let it cool long enough, because if you try to flip it shortly after it comes out of the oven, it's just going to break into pieces. And now we gotta make the glaze. Are you ready? I'm ready. Let's go. So I've got 2 separate bowls because one is going to be green, one is going to be red. I like to use the gel food dye instead of the liquid because it gives you a little bit better color, and because it works really well with many baking things. If you're making a cake and you want to make it blue cake, I suggest you use the gel food dye instead of the liquid food dye. Same thing with the buttercream icing. If you want to use a buttercream icing, liquid dyes don't work very well. They more or less separate when you mix them into a buttercream icing, whereas the gel food coloring works much better. You get a more uniformed color throughout. Alright, so for each one of these, I have about 1 cup to 1.5 cups, depending upon how much glaze that you want to have. It's really up to you when it comes to the amount of the glaze. To these, we're going to add about 1 tablespoon to 2 tablespoons of milk to get a thick but not too runny consistency. So once we add our milk, then we're going to add our dye, mix it up, and then we're on to the next step. So now we have our red and our green here, and you want to have them in the consistency where you can, pick up your fork and you have these beautiful lines. You don't want it to be so thick, but you don't want it to be too runny either. Alright, so now, you want to get your bundt cake like this. And I mean, you can do the whole thing a solid color and then some, stripes over the top of it. It's really up to your preference, but you just kind of do your green. Like I said, it doesn't have to be perfect. It actually looks really cool when it's not perfect. Get some big splotches in there. So you don't all want it to be thick. Okay, then we take our red. Make sure you get all that color incorporated. See how pretty that red is? You won't get that from a liquid. you have to use the gel dye. And it costs the same amount of money, and you can still get them in packaging, the same colors. You get red, yellow, blue, and green. And like I said, they really they work so much better for icings or cakes or whatever your little heart desires with coloring. All right, and I say we're done. She's beautiful.
The snow, then I am dreaming of a white Christmas with every Christmas card I write. May your days, may your days, may your days be merry and bright. And may all your Christmases be white. I'm dreaming of a white Christmas, just like the ones I used to know, where the treetops glisten and the children listen to hear sleigh bells in the snow. Yeah, 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 I'm dreaming of a white